Welcome, everyone. Today's topic is the future of data science. And I'm so pleased to say I'm joined here by Kirk Borne, who is the chief data scientist for Booz Allen Hamilton. How are you? How are you, Kirk?
Bernard, it's great to be here. I'm doing well today. Thank you.
Good. Obviously you don't really need a lot of introductions. Many people in this space of data science, big data, AI have come across you because you're very active. You're an influencer, you're a speaker, you're a writer. You've not always been in the consulting industry. You started as an astrophysicist. I think we can hopefully go into this in a bit more detail. Maybe is there anything you can share with us that people might not find on your LinkedIn profile?
That's a very good question. I put pretty much my entire resume on LinkedIn, but there's a lot more biography that ever fits onto a LinkedIn profile.
Absolutely.
So I thought of a couple of things. We all have lots of things. I thought of a couple of things, sort of one distant past and one more recent. So I'll start with the distant past thing. I actually, as a child, actually went to school in England.
Oh wow!
And in East Yorkshire County in Driffield, there was a Royal Air Force base there. My father was U.S. Air Force, and during the 1960s, he was stationed in Driffield. And so I went to school there for a couple of years, and I always credit some of the English schooling for my strong foundation and a lot of things. I mean, I think back to those days frequently of that experience there. And anyway, so I have some connections. And after spending a few years in England as a young child, I mean, I picked up the accent. I had the mop top haircut from like the Beatles did in the '60s. I had the cardigan sweater and the knickers. And so when we came home from years in England back to the United States, my relatives said to my parents, "Who is this kid?" Because I was a Brit at that point. Anyway, so that's not anywhere on my LinkedIn. And the more recent thing is, I'm a co-author of a book that's coming out soon. It's called Demystifying AI for the Enterprise.
Oh,
so I'm working with several authors, and it'll be coming out pretty soon. And so I contributed a couple chapters there that covers many different industries and verticals and how AI is affecting those enterprises. And so look forward to talking more about that when it comes out.
Fantastic. I would just want to say hello to all the people who have joined and are joining us here on the live stream. This live stream is obviously streamed to LinkedIn and to YouTube, and we will also make this available as a podcast. So if anyone ever wants to re-listen or re-watch any of these, you can head to my YouTube channel or my podcast to listen and view them whenever is convenient for you. I just have a little look through the stream, and we've people from all across the world joining us here, which is lovely. From Turkey, from Jordan, from India, from Azerbaijan, from Iraq, from Germany, from the UK, from Atlanta, Georgia. Just having from Egypt, from Barcelona in Spain, from South Africa. So this is wonderful to see. And thank you very much for joining us. And these sessions are for all of you listening. So feel free to ask us any questions you have, share any comments with us, and hopefully we'll have a chance to answer as many of your questions as we can. So Kirk, maybe you can share with us how you got into data science. What was your inspiration behind all of this?
Well, it actually goes all the way back to my youth when I was inspired to be a scientist when I was very young. I got an astronomy book from an uncle when I was 9 years old, and it was filled with pretty pictures, not very much technical stuff, but I was just so inspired. I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to understand the universe. I was sort of like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I managed to be successful in the math and the physics and all the things I needed to be to go all the way through school and get a PhD in astronomy from Caltech. So one of the top schools in astronomy in the world. And I was very privileged to go to the very university, the very place I wanted to go as a child, because all of the pictures in that astronomy book were from Palomar Observatory, which was run by Caltech. Anyway, so I basically worked with data as an astronomer my entire schooling, my early professional career. I mean, I still consider myself an astrophysicist. Even up to a few years ago, my doctoral students that I was working with at the university were doing some of them were doing PhDs with me on their on astronomy data. So after graduate school, I spent almost 20 years working at NASA, the space agency here, on astronomy data systems. So first with the Hubble Space Telescope. So maybe some people have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope. I had various roles there. My first role was basically on the front end. I wrote the entire proposal entry processing system. I mean, the database, software, the interface, everything. That was sort of the front end of the telescope, people who write proposals to use the telescope. And after several years, I moved to the back end, so to speak, on the data archive, where the data was stored and making that publicly accessible to the scientific research community worldwide. And so I learned a lot about engineering, about user experience, about how to organize data, create metadata. So these were things I didn't learn in grad school because I was doing data analysis as an astronomer. So I told people, while my day job was data, my night job was data as an astronomer. So it was always data, data, data. But after 10 years at the Hubble, I moved on to a NASA contract manager job. As a contract, I was managing a team of people supporting our NASA government client at the Astronomy Data Center at NASA. And so we were managing tens of thousands of experiments of data collected by NASA experiments. And they weren't necessarily big experiments, but just any kind of experiment where they collected data. Our role was to preserve that data like a library for all time, because the taxpayers spent money on these data, on these experiments, and after the scientists got through with the experiment, what should they do with it? I mean, this was even before the days where we had World Wide Web repositories of data like we have nowadays, and so we really needed a library. So long before I was even out of grade school, the United States Congress authorized the creation of this National Space Science Data Center back in the 1960s. So anyway, it was the permanent digital repository. But anyway, so about 23 years ago, I was at that job. And one day, one of my colleagues knew that our job was to collect and store for all time and archive these data sets. He came to me at a conference and said, "Hey, we got our experiment ending and we want to give you our data set to store in your archive." And that was normal because that's what happened. I mean, at that time we had 15,000 experiments worth of data. So he was just saying, "Hey, we got an experiment we're finishing and we want to give our data to somebody because we don't have no place to keep it." And it turns out this data set was over 2 terabytes. Well, in 1997, when we had that conversation, actually 23 years ago, 2 terabytes was an enormous amount of data. Mm. And I didn't realize just how critically enormous it was until I went back and talked with our NASA managers at the facility and said, "Hey, we have this opportunity to bring in 2 terabytes." And they looked at me like I was like, "Are you kidding?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This is what we do, right?" He said, "Yeah, but we've been doing this for 40 years or 30, 30 something years." And he said, "We have 15,000 experiments of data here. And the sum total of all of them combined is less than 1 terabyte. And you want to bring in one more that requires us to triple the capacity of the data center? I mean, are you kidding?" Yeah. And so they basically said, "Well, if you can figure out what to do with it, maybe we'll consider it." So at that point, I said, "What can one do with this much data?" And I discovered machine learning and what we called in those days data mining, or another phrase people used in those days in the research world was KDD, knowledge discovery from data. And this was mathematics that I'd never seen before. I mean, I had millions of courses of math in my physics courses, et cetera. I never saw machine learning like this. I've done data analysis for decades as an astronomer. I never saw data mining before. I never saw this kind of math and this kind of discovery from data, especially on the scale of big data, which we now call it. And so the more I dug into it, I just became more and more fascinated. And anyway, that was sort of the birth of my interest in this. And it's been 20 plus years of growing more and more and more into the data science and the AI and the machine learning dimension of my life. But I still consider myself an astrophysicist. But more than anything, I remember when I took the job at Booz Allen Hamilton 5 years ago. at that time I was at a university, so there was another career step in there I missed. But anyway, I was when I took this job as a consultant, management consultant at Booz Allen, my wife said to me, "Well, you've had many careers." She said to me, "You've had many careers," and I thought to myself, "No, I've only had one career as a scientist." I've always had one career since 9 years old. One goal, one vision, one career as a scientist. I've just had many different jobs.
Very good. So what is it you do today? How do you split your time at Booz Allen Hamilton?
Well, fortunately for me, I have a very special, unique position there. So I have 2 official titles and 1 unofficial title. So I'm the principal data scientist in the firm. We have many data scientists. We have over 2,000 data scientists. We have several chief data scientists who are sort of chiefs in the sense that they oversee a particular vertical, whether it's cybersecurity or healthcare or something like this. But there's one principal data scientist, and that's me. I also have the title of executive advisor. So I do a lot of advising at the executive level, both to internally and to our clients. And the unofficial title I have is data science fellow. So Booz Allen has a fellows program. We have 4 or 5 fellows, for example, in cybersecurity, in healthcare, and a couple other things like that, but only 1 in data science. So what these things do for me, these titles do for me, is they give me the freedom to do pretty much what I want. All right, within the confines of data science and analytics, helping build our business, but primarily building the brand around the business. All right, so we have 27,000 employees who are doing fantastic work, working with the clients every day. Boots on the ground, doing all the fabulous things. So I just consider myself sort of like the cheerleader for this team of wonderful people doing fantastic things. And so I build that brand through what I do on Twitter and LinkedIn and my social promotions that I do. It brings attention back to Booz Allen when people see me as Booz Allen employee doing the things that I do, sharing the love of data, the love of analytics, the love of AI to the world. And so it's what I love to do. It helped. So everyone wins in this situation, I think.
Very good. Sounds like a perfect job for you and a great stimulating environment.
Well, it is really perfect because one of the other dimensions of my heart is teaching. Right? I feel like I've always wanted to be an educator. Even when I was in school, I was tutoring people, and I always enjoyed teaching. And so anyway, after 20 years at NASA, I did become a professor of astrophysics at George Mason University, but I never taught astrophysics. I taught data science. And so when I discovered Twitter, I said, wow, this is my micro education platform. I can teach the world 140 characters at a time. And so I just fell in love with Twitter because it was a place I could share my knowledge and things that I was learning, what other people have been learning, sharing other people's stuff, and then that's what an educator does. That person shares knowledge, and that's how I perceive it. I perceive I'm just sharing knowledge and educating the world on some pretty amazing, fascinating technologies.
Right, and this is exactly how I do my role as well. I think it's wonderful just to share examples and what is happening. Today we're talking about the future of data science. So why is data science so important today? If you look back at the 23-year framework that you just described, from 2 terabytes to a world today where we can generate 2 terabytes in a second in business, why is data science important today?
Well, for one thing, as you just described, data is everywhere. We live in a digital world, and whether people think about digital technologies as data, it is data. So people have the smartphones in their hand, and we shop on e-commerce stores. We use online conferencing tools now because we all have to. And so everything we're dealing with has some kind of digital component, and therefore a data component, because it's the data, it's the flows of data that enable all those technologies to work, right? So they're both the fuel and the output, all right? So the input and the output of all of our technologies are data. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the case, if pretty much every industry and everything that we touch and do has that sort of digital connection, then it's important for people, in fact, imperative for people to have some understanding of that. If for no other reason than just from the ethical side of knowing that the fact that you are creating data and to be aware that people are using your data, and it's not that it's always a bad thing, because it's more times than not, despite what you might think, more times than not, it's a beneficial thing. They're finding ways to make our lives better, to improve our experience. and that's through the signals. Think of it more like sort of. Imagine just watching someone's face during an interview, and if their faces, if they're excited or not, or sad or angry, you're picking up a signal there of the person's reaction and response to what they're being presented. So businesses are doing this in order to produce better products for you, a better experience, better feedback when you contact them, a better customer call experience, especially using chatbots. People think, oh, chatbots, I don't want to talk to a bot. But they've done surveys and they found that the vast majority of people would prefer to start their conversation with the bot. Because first of all, you get immediate answer. The phone gets picked up immediately by the robot, right? If you wait for a human, you might have to wait 20 minutes or an hour. And more times than not, the questions are pretty straightforward, like what's the balance in my account, or how do I return this product? And the bot can answer that question. So what happens then is the bot then when it gets to the part where it's a complex question, it's handed over to the human. So what happens in that particular scenario? So this is just one case I'm talking about here. What happens in that case? It's a win-win-win for everybody, right? It's a win for the customer because, again, your simple questions were answered immediately. Your more complex questions are being addressed by a human being. For the call center employee, I've heard this truth. I mean, I've heard this from people who were in this case. I mean, I'm not just like extrapolating as an astrophysicist. I've talked with people who've worked in call centers. They said that this is actually the best employee experience boost they've ever had, because now they're answering the interesting, hard, complex questions and solving hard problems for customers, which is what gives them joy in their job. They don't get joy by answering the same questions over and over again that are already on the FAQ on the company website, right? And so the company wins because better customer experience, employee wins with better employee experience, all right? We win as customers of the company by getting our issues addressed quickly. So all that is powered by AI. The application of data. AI as the application of data, to automate or to inform or to give insights to different processes in business, in organizations, in every industry on the planet.
Very good. So as we're chatting here today, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. It looks like in Europe we are hitting a second wave as we speak. What do you think has been the impact of this pandemic on the field of data science?
Well, it's a pretty interesting question, actually, because there's so many dimensions to that. One is just on people's awareness. So from the general public perspective, the awareness of how much all of the information that you're getting is driven by data.
Yeah.
Right. The very thing you just said, right? You're talking about this second wave. Well, how do we know there's a second wave? Because we've collected data, right? I mean, just implicit in the statement is that we're collecting data. So the amount of insights we're getting about the spread and so forth is driven by data. Second of all, it's giving sort of impetus to this digital transformation of businesses that we never expected to be accelerated quite like this. All of a sudden, businesses need to have more digital tools for people, since people are working remotely. Sort of more things that connect employees through digital channels in different ways. So data sort of informs how to design those things, how to build those things, how to improve those things. But when it comes right down to those are sort of the general public, and then the specific sort of business questions. But then when you get to the data science community, the data scientists themselves, the changes are pretty significant, because I think for the longest time there have been many applications of data science, but there was still a very large component of data science being sort of a playground. That's just right. So in a lot of places they just sort of experiment with their data. So it's like a sandbox. It's a playground for the data scientists to go work with the company's data and try to find some insights to help just create and innovate and do some business value. And there's been a lot of business value created. I'm not saying there hasn't been, but now we're saying let's get busy and focus on these hard problems. And it's not just about experimentation with cool algorithms. Sometimes a very trivial amount of data and a trivial algorithm may be the only one that you need to solve a particular problem. And so we're getting more focused on outcomes. I always tell people I talk with people and they say, oh, we are a data first company, or we want to be a data first company. And I said, why do you want to be a data first company? The data is the fuel. That's the input. You really should focus on outcomes, the outputs, right? It's sort of like putting fuel in your car, right? That's not the important thing, putting, petrol in your tank. That some people say it's all about the journey or it's all about the destination. Well, either way, it's not about the fuel. So we're focusing more on outcomes more than ever. And what happens in the COVID era is that we realize that a lot of our former models, our previous year models, are no longer working. Like, we predict that people will buy certain clothing or certain, vacation or sportswear or different types of things they would do based upon the season of the year, spring, summer, and fall. Well, all that is completely off this year. It doesn't work this year because people are locked at home or they have all these other constraints. And so it's called concept drift in data science, right? So all of a sudden we're realizing that our models have to deal with both concept drift, because now we're the target variables are completely different this year. The outcomes we're targeting are different. There's also data drift. The types of data we're collecting, a lot more, disease spread data that people are sort of focusing a lot on that, and contact tracing. Who are you contacted with? Who do you meet with? What places do you go? And if there's a sudden hotspot of COVID cases in a particular region, it's important to know who's been there. Okay, so the data we collect and the applications and even the outputs are all changed dramatically in the last 6 months. And so they've said basically that digital companies that plan to spend 5 to 10 years doing digital transformation, it's all been compressed in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and this is exactly what I'm seeing. I see more data-driven decision making, where data is more important than ever. As you said, what we're seeing is this acceleration of digital transformation due to necessity, where organizations simply needed to create an environment where people could work from home, where they could automate business processes. And as you say, the other thing I'm seeing is that the shelf life of data seems to be reducing at the moment, because the world is changing so rapidly that even models and data sets that we had a year ago are no longer relevant.
Right. Yeah.
Very good. So in terms of some applications, what are some of your favorite examples? You work with lots of organizations across the world. You have access to some amazing leading edge work. If examples of AI for good, so where AI and data science really makes a difference to some of the biggest issues we are facing as the world, as a civilization today, what would you say are some of your favorite examples that you would highlight here?
Yeah, that's a really good topic. Just in general, I would say to people, they say like the two biggest applications of this data science and AI are in health and cybersecurity. Because first of all, every single human being has health, right? Hopefully good health. But so applications to health, because it affects every person on the planet. And cybersecurity, because it's really a cyber war that we're fighting right now. I mean, you think of all the cases of financial fraud and ransomware and denial of service attacks and sort of network intrusions. There's all manner of things happening in the dark side of the internet that are disrupting what we're trying to do on the good side, right? So AI, just for example, one thing that I like to use are metaphors. I'm a big fan of using metaphors. All right, so there's sort of a common sort of metaphor I use when I think about healthcare and even digital marketing. Again, digital marketing, because we're all buying products. That's important. And cyber, and that's sort of the behavior analytics side. The behavior analytics. So AI and the data enable you to discover a pattern in data, a behavior, whether it's a cyber actor trying to detect whether this is good or bad behavior, or whether it's a health behavior, whether it's you're doing something right or wrong that's contributing to good or bad health, even marketing, customer behavior. What kind of interests and intents and desires are expressed when a customer goes to an e-commerce store and puts something in a search box or clicks on particular products? You're sort of seeing a behavior, a set of interests, a pattern developing. And so behavior analytics, I like to use an example from my astronomy days, which I call the killer asteroid. So the killer asteroid, okay, don't panic, people. So the killer asteroid is just my metaphor. So what is a killer asteroid? Okay, so let's start with what's an asteroid. So it's this little rock that's moving through space, and if it's big enough and impacts Earth, it can wipe out civilization. So we track these things in space. So what do? We collect data. We're collecting data on where it is and where it's moving and how it's moving. And from that data, we can build a predictive model of where it's going. So we can build a predictive analytic model for the expected outcome if this thing continues on its present course. And so the same thing can be applied to customers and marketing, to patients and healthcare, and to cyber actors in a network environment. So if you predict something bad's going to happen, like the hacker's going to get into your data store and steal your data, that's the killer asteroid moment. Or if you have a very good and lucrative customer who decides to take their business to some other business, to your competitor, that's your killer asteroid moment. And when an employee decides to leave a company, one of your star performing, that's employee attrition. That's your killer asteroid moment in the HR world. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's always a prediction that you don't like. Same thing in the healthcare space, right? If a patient comes in, you go to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, I got these symptoms. And they say, well, you're going to die next Tuesday. Here's my bill. Or the astronomer comes in and says, a killer asteroid is going to wipe out Earth and civilization next Tuesday. Here's my bill. Have a nice day. Or your cyber analyst comes in and says, hey, someone's stealing all of our data. I've detected it for you. Here's my bill. Have a nice day. So every one of those conversations will end with will continue with the client saying, hey, wait, can't you do something about it? So in medicine, we call it a prescription. In analytics, we call it prescriptive analytics. So prescriptive analytics is understanding the DNA of how this entity moves through its space. Whether it's an asteroid, we understand gravity and that we can apply forces and hopefully move it off of that trajectory. So what can we do to move a customer, move an employee, move a patient, move a cyber actor to a better outcome than the one we predict? And so data informs that. Behavior analytics informs that. And the AI can help detect the behavior and also institute the intervention that leads to the better outcome. So that's a lot of examples in one.
And for me, healthcare is probably the most fascinating use case of AI, where especially when we move into proactive, predictive healthcare. So there's even before you go to the doctor and say, I've got these symptoms, that you say, actually, maybe I have an Apple Watch and other devices that monitor my heart rate, and they will tell me that something is going wrong before I even experience any real symptoms. And as you said, cybersecurity is probably not the most sexy example, but I think it's one that every company now needs. And there are amazing use cases around this where you can now use AI to simply monitor what's going on in your IT systems, and they can spot attacks and shut them down before they happen, which is great. I also love environmental use cases. So using data to better understand the impact of climate change and reducing emissions. I was talking to the downstream director of Shell just 2 days ago, and they're now forming a partnership with Microsoft to actually tackle climate change using AI, which is a really fascinating use case.
Yeah, I think that sort of proactive way of thinking about analytics is both predictive and prescriptive, right? Mm-hmm. Because first of all, you're seeing what's coming, and then you're going to take some action to deal with it. The way that I like to think of it in analytics is separately, even though proactive includes both sort of seeing what's coming and then doing something about it. And in analytics, we split that into predictive and prescriptive, because predictive is essentially traditional machine learning, right? You have a training set, and you can see from the historical training data what's coming. So you can do a predictive model off of historically trained data. Mm-hmm. So that's a very confined, well-defined task in data science and machine learning, predictive modeling. So prescriptive modeling is more about causal factor discovery or optimization, that is finding the things that cause certain outcomes and try to optimize the outcome. Okay, so the best prescriptive analytics comes from having a lot of data sources, a lot of dimensions in your data, a lot of perspectives, if you will, many different ways to look at the problem and say, if we do this, what will happen? If we do that, what will happen? If we push it this way. So you can have a single time series of just a stream of numbers and build a predictive model of what the next values will be. But you have no insight into what causes it to go up or down. You just know it's going to go up and down. It's when you have these external data sources that say if we treat it this way, or we prod it that way, or we do something to change the environmental condition, we know it'll go up or down. So depending on whether you want to drive something up like revenue or drive something down, like customer returns or patient mortality. I mean, so we're always trying to optimize some function, and you can't really optimize that unless you have this extra data that tells you, well, how is this thing going to respond if I take this action? So the more data we collect, the more we can see those insights of, okay, this thing is going in this direction. That's predictive. And I can make it change direction. That's my killer S, right? I can make this thing change direction if I apply these particular forces based upon the data that I've collected to know how this thing behaves. So prescriptive analytics is really about understanding the DNA of that entity, whether it's a patient or employee or the climate, planet Earth, or an asteroid or a cyber actor, whatever it happens to be. Understanding the behavior of it, that is the internal DNA. How is this thing naturally going to evolve unless I intervene and do something? And the data gives you that insight into what to do to intervene to do something.
Very good. So we talked about some of the data for good use cases and the positive impact. When it comes to data science, are there any areas that you have concerns about? We're using data in the world. I mean, you touched on marketing, which I guess some people would argue, great, companies know a lot about me, they can target me with my marketing. Others find it quite picky, especially when they don't know where this data is coming from and how those algorithms are targeting them. But there are other even more dangerous examples. So what areas of data science have you got concerns about?
Well, certainly the ethical side of data is as important as the algorithmic side. By that I mean you can learn all about the algorithms and the coding and how to do it, but you need to how to do it correctly. But you also need to know how to do it ethically. And so when I was at the university, we actually started the world's first undergraduate data science degree program at George Mason University 13 years ago. Wow, a long time. And as we were designing the curriculum, I insisted that we needed to have a data ethics course. And this was 13 years ago. Okay, so we come full circle now. Everybody, that's all we're talking about now is the ethical side of what we're doing here. And so there's a lot of concern about uses and misuses and abuses of data. And people should, who are doing data scientists, should always have those conversations about what are the potential risk factors in this. Who is it benefiting? Who are the risk factors? And so I like to take a perspective which is related to human subjects research. I don't know if you ever looked into human subjects research. And I was at a university, and so they're very, very touchy about following the guidelines. And I never worried about that because I was an astronomer. My subjects were extraterrestrial. No one cared whether I studied that galaxy or this galaxy. I used to have to sign affidavits at NASA swearing that I was not stealing the personal identity or sharing it online of the subjects of my research. And then I had to list the subjects of my research, and they happened to be galaxy names. So anyway, I didn't want to go to jail, so I filled out this form every year, even though it's the same kind of stuff. But I learned more about it when I started doing some research. And I worked in some citizen science projects, so I had to be aware of. So what am I getting to? Well, in human subjects research, there's principles, and one of those principles is what they basically call equity. Basically, that no single group of people should have a disproportionate share of the risk or a disproportionate share of the benefit of what you're doing. And so so there are benefits and risks in what we're doing, but there should not be a disproportionate share given to any particular group. All right. So whether you want to call that prejudice, bias, or what kind of, I mean, in statistics, it's called bias. I mean, it's just a mathematical term, which means that you're not fairly sampling or applying your model to the data. And so we have to be more and more aware of this because, like I said, we're sort of moving out of sort of that playground aspect of data science where everyone's discovering data, saying, wow, what can we do with all this data our business has, to actually building things that impact real people every day. And some of those applications are pretty benign, right? For example, a recommender engine. We all like recommender engines, I think, when we go to an e-commerce store or website and it recommends products to us that we may not have thought of. People who bought this also bought that. People who saw this movie also might like this movie. People who bought this book might like this book. We've seen these things, and we benefit from that. We also have text autocomplete on our phones, right? If you have a smartphone, it gives you a suggested completion to the next of the word or the sentence. And even though it's kind of funny, sometimes it fails in some funny ways. We benefit from that, right? And the chatbot example I gave, we benefit from that. So there's positive benefits for these things, but then of course there's the downsides, and that is if what it's doing has some kind of bias implicit from the training data or the modeling or the algorithm choices. And so we have to be aware of those things. And the best way to be aware of is not to be an individual data scientist, so to speak, but to be a team of data scientists. So organizations really need teams, not just because the more the merrier, but you need all the different perspectives that come from different team members. And so, there's skills. The skills of the people on the team may be different. One person may be the data engineer, one may be the coder, one may be the algorithm person, one may be the math person, one may be the business domain expert. All these people are different. One of them might be the astrophysicist who has experience in a few areas. But all those people, nevertheless, give a perspective, a human perspective that's unique to them. And that's why you need to have that. And so what we're seeing now is not that we're going to solve all possible problems, because every field can be subject to some kind of misuse of the technology that field's using, whether it's data science or something completely different. But the way we can hopefully solve those problems or address those problems is to, again, to have more eyes on it, more perspectives on it.
Very good. I'm just having a look through the stream here. Lots of really good questions coming in. So feel free to ask more questions and let us know what you actually think about this session. So here's Kerry is asking one question. He's saying, can you give us some examples of where data science and AI have taken us in the wrong direction? Do you want to take that?
Well, I can think of some specific examples. I don't know if I can get too specific.
Maybe you can anonymize them.
But there are examples I know where data science has sort of found sort of predictive variables in the sense that causal variables. I don't want to get too specific here because I don't want to. Someone may infer what I'm talking, what business I'm talking about, so I don't want that to happen. But you can sort of like, so in marketing, in a sense, marketing is sort of a causal field, right? You want to do things that will encourage someone to buy your product, to click the link, to do something, right? And so when you're sort of like causing someone to do something, and then again, you're not really forcing. You're just sort of like sort of what the person's interests and intents are. They're more likely to do this thing when it's presented this way to them. And so you can clearly induce people to do things that may not be exactly right. Okay, let's just put it that way. I've known cases where companies have sort of induced people to spend more money just by the way that they sort of packaged the ad. Okay, and that's, to me, that's they sell the exact same product somewhere else on their site for a different price, right? But they know that there's a certain high-end customer who's visiting their site, and they use whatever it takes to sort of attract a high-end customer to a particular, higher-end product line on the store. But you're finding the same products packaged slightly different, but the same thing being charged more money. And I have very specific examples in my head, but I don't want to get that explicit. So there's cases right there where again, that's sort of the equity thing I was talking about, and that is you're sort of taking unfair advantage of a part of a group. You're not treating everyone equally, right? And I'm not saying that there's not some benefit to some higher quality or extra features of the thing the customer's buying. And charge more money, but I'm just saying to cause things to happen that are not beneficial to the general population. There's cases also, I think, where we jump sort of to conclusions about our models before we really understand it. So we can build up, for example, a medical diagnosis and start treating people. And then we didn't pay enough attention to things that medical practitioners know, like side effects, right? I mean, so that surprisingly, a lot of data scientists were writing papers on epidemiology this year with the COVID, and they don't know anything about epidemiology. All right, I have personally avoided writing any articles, giving any talks about the spread of the COVID, because I am not an expert in that. I mean, I could talk about sort of the data science we're using to collect data and to understand data, but I'm not going to go out and build a predictive model on telling people what to do or anything like that. Now, I know people who do that. In fact, my company does that because we have epidemiologists on our staff. They understand this stuff. We have health experts. They've worked with the Centers for Disease Control. They've worked with the VA hospitals. They've worked with the National Institutes of Health. So they know what data to collect. They know the factors involved, and they can build a predictive and a prescriptive model of both for policy direction and individual direction. So again, bringing in the domain experts helps to avoid again the data science trap that said, hey, I have data, what can I do with it? and we need to sort of avoid that trap. Just because we have data doesn't mean we're an expert in every field.
Yeah, and I think a big problem is biased data, for example. So if the data is wrong, your outputs will be wrong. Then biased algorithms is a big problem. And I think there's so many examples of where AI and data has led us down the wrong path and has had really bad consequences. For me, one of the worst examples is an autonomous drone that killed someone that is innocent, for example. All of these things we have experienced and we are experiencing every day. We need to be aware of all of these things.
Yeah, those are extreme examples that exist and absolutely significant, important examples. Mm-hmm. But even the day-to-day examples are the ones that impact more people than those specific cases. So I'll be a little bit more specific in my general answer. So there was one company, again, data scientists working with the data, found in the data, the user data. They had an app that people could use on their phone to shop for this particular company's product. And when they were shopping on the app, the store, the company had access to the data on the person's phone, like what kind of search history they have, what kind of where are they located, obviously time of day and things like this. So the data scientist in this commerce company had access to all kinds of data from the person's phone from the app. Mm. All right, and one of the pieces of data was extremely predictive. That is, when this particular data on the phone was seen, they could offer a higher price to a customer for their product, and the customer would buy it. And what was that data? As it turned out, it was the phone charge, the battery charge on the phone. So when they saw that the person was shopping and the battery charge was close to zero, they figured, well, this person's phone is about to go dead. If they're shopping now with their phone that close to dead, they must really want to buy whatever it is they're shopping for really badly. And so let's just boost the price up, because they're going to buy it anyway, because their phone's they don't have time to go shop at another online store because their battery is about to die. Their phone is about to lose charge. And so they actually offered higher prices because that's what the data said. The data said people would be willing to spend more money if the battery charge was low. That's just a data science, objective, mathematical fact. Mm. But is it a right thing to do? And I would say, I think once this sort of news hit, and it did go public eventually, and it was very bad press for that company. They said, essentially, this famous line from a movie called Jurassic Park, where they said, "You're so busy wondering whether you could, you never really asked whether you should." Mm. Right? So, yeah, you have the data that tells you this, but should you really be doing it? And so that's an example that can affect a lot of people. I mean, the drone example you gave is extremely critical. I'm not downplaying it, but something that can affect a lot of people is just some little quirky piece of information that's in your data and your profile as a user on an app can lead you to just not being treated in the same way as other customers are being treated. That's just, I mean, those are just examples.
Fascinating that you're talking about the battery life, and this is just another set of data. And I remember with a company that realized that if they had access to your battery charging behavior, it could actually give you a lot of insight about your risk appetite as a person, because there are some people that regularly run out of battery, and then there's some that will always make sure their phone is charged properly. And
That's me.
yeah, my risk appetite is very low.
Though I do all my tweeting and social stuff on my phone, so my livelihood depends upon my phone being charged.
Exactly. What are some of the really exciting developments that you are seeing at the moment in the field of data science? You are someone that again has access to lots of leading edge research. You see lots of stuff happening. What are some of the applications, some of the things that emerge in the field that get you excited?
Well, there's quite a bit. Again, this year seemed to have compressed sort of 10 years of research into 6 months. I mean, just anything in life, 10 years of something in life has been compressed in 6 months this year. That's the year 2020 for us. And so in the machine learning world, in the research world, I mean, certainly one of the hottest topics of the last few weeks has been the GPT-3. So GPT-3, that sounds like a mouthful. It's really just basically like a text autocomplete, for lack of a better way of saying it. But it's the most advanced third generation, hence the GPT-3, third generation autocomplete. But what it's not completing the word or the sentence, it's actually narrative autocomplete. So you can basically tell this algorithm a topic. For example, you could talk about, say, the invention of the light bulb, or World War II, or Marco Polo, or anything, and it would generate literally paragraphs, an entire narrative about that topic. And the reason it can do that is because it has basically consumed like 175 trillion, I think is the number, pieces of information from the internet. It's consumed, like the equivalent of books and history and knowledge and all disciplines. And so you can just give it a topic and it auto-completes an entire blog article about the topic. That's kind of scary to people, because if people have looked at it and that it's very hard to distinguish the writing from a human. And that's pretty impressive, actually, but also scary at the same time. But I read an article yesterday that has me less scared, because they said it sort of loses its train of thought. It's just an algorithm, right? So it's generating complete sentences, self-consistent paragraphs, but it could, further down into the narrative, it might actually contradict itself, because it's just creating words that make complete sentences within the context of what it's talking about. It doesn't have reasoning skills. So it can say one thing and then say the exact opposite later on, because it's just making some kind of a statement in the context and in the words of the topic. So for GPT-3, this narrative autocomplete, that's hot these years. Another thing that's really coming around, which is and comes under the umbrella of what I call the statement, "What's old is new again." And so federated machine learning is very hot right now. When I say it's old but new again, one of my projects I worked on at NASA, and through my years, once I went even to the university, I was working with a team of people who were doing distributed data mining, it was called. So distributed data mining was actually applying the machine learning algorithm on distributed data without ever moving the data. So you can build sort of an inference engine off of data when all the data is in one place. Again, you can get it as accurate as possible. But what if you're not allowed to move the data or even access the data? So what you do is you ship the code, you ship the algorithm to the data. That's what we used to say. We used to say that, ship the code to the data instead of moving the data. So you can build a predictive algorithm and build it sort of partially correct by shipping that algorithm and training it on a data set at a location that you're not allowed to move it from. Then you take that trained algorithm, which is only partially correct, to another set of data at another place that you're not allowed to move or even have other access to, other than the algorithm sees it, but you don't. And you update the parameters. Basically, you tune the parameters to get the algorithm to work better off of this new data set. And then you ship it around again. Maybe you have multiple places you do this, and then it comes back to the original places, and you keep tuning it and optimizing it without ever moving any data. Okay, so we call that distributed data mining. So now it's called federated machine learning. So federated machine learning. So the word federated basically means each organization has autonomy over their own data. So with the rise of the COVID, there's a lot of health analytics algorithms and applications where you're not allowed to see the data. Plus, the data lives in different places, in hospitals and physician care centers, and even in government organizations. You're not allowed to see the data. You're not allowed to move the data. So you can move the algorithm around and build a better and better and better and better predictive model by not ever moving the data or even seeing the data. So blockchain comes into this in a lot of ways, because you may want to have some kind of, maybe some data needs to be transferred, then you can transfer it securely through blockchain. Again, only the algorithm sees it, the individual doesn't see it. So federated machine learning is becoming extremely important now as we get in this era where we need more data, from more organizations to build better models to deal with the current pandemic and other similar sorts of things. And I'll just mention one more, just briefly, and that is, I'm seeing, again, what's old is new again. I call it the return and the rise of small data. We've talked so long about big data, but really, you truly need a lot of data, and I'm not discounting that. In fact, my whole career is based on this, and that's what I've been saying for the last hour or 50 minutes. You need all these dimensions and high varieties and features in your data to get the insight you need to build the best predictive and prescriptive model. But once you get right down to it, it's really a small set of the data that is really the sharpest focus you need, is what is the piece of data that's going to give me the answer I need right now. And so sometimes it's a small piece of the whole. So I like to say that AI is fueled by data, but also helps data, right? So AI helps us to target the data. I can say basically triage the data for the most significant piece, which might be a very small piece of the big data stream, in order to solve a particular problem or to address a particular issue. And so data for AI and AI for data is my new mantra, right? It says data, because AI itself consumes, or what people say, devours data. It needs lots of data to work. But AI can now help us we can now use AI back on the data to say, well, what data should I feed the AI? Okay. It's sort of like, it becomes cognitive in some sense, like we are, right? I mean, we walk out our front door of our house and we see everything, right? The trees and the street. We see everything. But if I paid attention to every single leaf on every single tree and what color it was, what shape it was, what position it's in, was it there yesterday, I would go crazy, right? So I know what part of that environment I should pay attention to when I step out into the street. All right. Okay. So my brain knows how to sift through all that information, because I have this cognitive intellect function going on in my head that knows how to deal with all of that. But if I just walked outside and all I saw was blackness in one leaf, I wouldn't have any idea what to do. So I need all the data to know how to navigate through the world, but I only use a certain portion of it to actually navigate safely through the world.
Very good. Yeah, they're all super exciting topics that I think will just push data science further along. So looking then into the future, what are your hopes and predictions for the future? If you think, okay, data science in 2021 and beyond, what do you predict is going to happen?
Well, I think we're going to see more data democratization. By that, I mean more places in every enterprise, every organization, where they sort of encourage employees. The phrase I like to use is, if you see something, say something. I have friends in New York City. That's the sign they have in the metro, the tube, I guess you would call it. If you see something, say something. That's more of a sort of a social contract. That is, if you see something going on, please tell somebody. But with businesses, different departments and different people, organizations do have access to data. I'm not saying go and access data you don't have access to, but people should realize, if you have access to data and you see some interesting pattern that can either reveal a customer concern or a product concern or a new market opportunity or a shift in the market or a safety incident in your business or an employee issue, if you see something, say something. And it's in data oftentimes where these signals will appear, because we're collecting data, and then someone will see it. Historically, someone might see something and say, well, it's not my job to say anything. I can tell you stories. We're almost out of some time here, but stories where people have been empowered in companies to look at data and say something. And they actually found some really interesting customer opportunities that actually led to big outcomes, positive outcomes for their organization, because some database engineer who was working with the data set one day, just doing his database engineering, database tuning work, it's not his job to deal with customers. It's his job as the IT guy. But he saw some interesting pattern in the data, and he said, "Hey," passed it up the chain to people. And said, "Did you know about this about our customer?" And it just led to this amazing sort of a positive outcome for the business. That's because the guy spoke up. Mm-hmm. So I would say, sort of from the higher level dimension of data science, we're going to see more data literacy, data democratization, people being encouraged and empowered to see something. If they see something, say something. In terms of sort of technology stuff, I would certainly say we're going to see more of this sort of AI for data, data for AI, and AI for data, because as the data floods into our organizations through sensors and everything else, we're going to need something that's going to help us to triage it. That is, what is it we should pay attention to now? What can we pay attention to later? And what is not important at all? So it's typical triage, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the thing where AI needs data and data needs AI mantra. So we're going to see, I think, the only way we're going to manage the data flood of the data we're creating is to be more smart about it. And that is use the AI that we're building to help us be smart about how we orchestrate the workflows with data. And finally, there's a long list I could give you. One of my favorite topics this year, I've seen it mentioned so many times. It's a thing called observability. I was just surprised how often I've seen it this year. And at first I didn't think about it, but then I started seeing it in more and more places. And I started thinking about sort of business process monitoring, application performance monitoring. All these things are monitoring through data streams. Right. So the monitoring is what you do. Observability is why you do it. So let me say that again. Monitoring is what you do. Observability is why you do it. So observability is a strategy, a business strategy. And I can imagine more business strategy around talking about what do we need to observe in order to take the best possible actions with our business, with our customers, with our employees, with our community, with the environment, with whatever. All right. So Internet of Things comes into play big time here, putting sensors on things to make them observable. So companies will be held more and more accountable, for example, in terms of the sort of the global issues of sustainable development goals. If you're familiar with the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, there's 17 of those. And if you dig deeper, there's objectives, measurable metrics, like over 230 observable metrics underneath those 17. Right? Things I call them KPIs for the world. Okay, key performance indicators of the world. And so the goals, the 17 major goals, like reduce poverty, zero hunger, healthcare for everyone, gender equality, those are big goals. But how do you achieve a big goal unless you create objectives and something you can measure against? This is just standard business, right? You can have this wonderful goal, but unless you can measure performance against it, how do you know you're getting there? So that's one example where we're going to have more observability in our companies meeting these sustainable development goals. And again, it's not just warm, fuzzy feeling. Yeah, I feel like we're doing these things, but we have data to prove it. And those are those KPIs for the world, the key performance metrics for every organization, but that's just one example. And observability, again, it has to be a strategy. That is, we are going to observe, again, not going to use the word tracking because tracking sounds onerous and it's intrusive and privacy invasion. It's not about tracking. It's just about observing what's going on and to be able to prove that you're accomplishing what you think you're accomplishing. Application performance monitoring, business performance monitoring, these things have existed for a while. We're now going to get more data in order to have a smart strategy of what data to collect and how to collect it. We need to start with this sort of concept of observability and thinking about our data in that way.
Very good. I love this. I love that we're starting with observability to really understand what are actually our strategic data needs. And if you then link them to the KPIs of our world, that is even better. And then once we have the data, we then give it to everyone. We democratize the data and give people the ability, and not just the technical ability in terms of data literacy, but also the cultural and hierarchical capabilities. So they have the autonomy, the authority to make decisions based on this data. And I think you're painting a very great, fantastic picture of the future of data science, I think.
Yeah, I think this is this brings me way back to my NASA days when we were working on satellites and stuff. We talked about Six Sigma. I don't know if you remember Six Sigma, sort of basically quality improvement initiatives and things like that. But I still remember the three tenets, the three sort of rules, so to speak, of Six Sigma. Say what you're going to do it, and then prove it.
Mm.
So you have to design metrics in order to prove that you've accomplished what you said you're going to do.
Mm.
So it starts with the strategy, lay out the plan, then you execute the plan, then you prove. So maybe observability is under an umbrella called provability. But anyway, I think data is going to allow us to do all those things.
Absolutely. We are now at the end of our hour. Thank you so much, Kirk, for joining me. Hopefully we'll do this many times in the future. I could go on for 3-4 hours now, exactly like we have. This 1 hour just disappeared like nothing.
Yeah, let's do this again.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for everyone tuning in. As I said, you can re-watch them on my YouTube channel. You can re-listen to them on my podcast, or head to my website where you can find lots of further articles and information. Thank you very much, Kirk. Lovely talking to you today.
You're welcome. And thank you all. Thank you, Bernard.